Welcome to the Frugalpreneur podcast. I am your host, Sarah St. John. My guest today went from 304 pounds to 175 pounds in just 260 days. He is here to talk to us about how his process, Rethink Dieting, unlocks business owners' potential as the weight comes off. Welcome to the show, Alan Thomas.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have this conversation. Can you give us a little bit of your background? I mean, I guess I covered a little bit there, but I'd love to hear your background.
I'm father of four adult kiddos, and my wife and I have been married about been just a little over 36 years. But I struggled with obesity and overweight for about 3 decades. And in 2017, after my 31st wedding anniversary, the day after, I got on the scale, which was something I really did not like doing back then. I got on the scale and looked down and saw 300 and the three at the beginning of the number for the first time. And it was 304. And I had been in the burial life insurance business for a long time, for over a decade. And I was 55 years old at the time. And burial insurance business primarily focuses on people 65 years and older. And it just hit me that I had never met a man. Now, you meet ladies, but you don't meet men. Very, very seldom. But I had never met a man that I can remember that was more than 100 pounds overweight, that was over 65. And what that spelled, now they're out there, but they are rare air. It's rare birds. But when I saw that number and had that thought, this feeling that I was going to be known as my wife's first husband, not because she was shopping around or got tired of me yet, but because of the fact that I couldn't put down the fork and spoon, and that my kids were going to call somebody else dad. As big as that is, and that was the big aha moment. But I also realized that I wasn't reaching my potential in my business, and I had a lot of hopes and dreams, and my weight was just holding me back. And so I went on a very public journey and committed to weighing 129 pounds less 265 days later, and I hit it in 260 days. And never in a million years did I plan on doing the kind of work we do now. We work with men and women who do struggle with overweight and obesity. My wife and I work together, and it was never even on my radar. So I can assure you that it was not planned, that it just happened. And so that was a big piece of, and people ask me, they say, well, gosh, that was an awful thing. I said, well, really, it wasn't. That day, it was awful. That day, it was really bad. And I don't think I've ever said this. I get interviewed a lot, but I've never said this. But other than I'm a Christian, and other than my relationship with God and my wife and family, that probably the greatest blessing I ever got was that 304-pound scale rating. Because the obstacle, I think it was a Ryan Halliday wrote a book called "The Obstacle Is the Way," and it was interesting. I did not plan on that being the way, but that's what happened. So fast forward 5 years, we work with men and women who struggle with this. And it's fascinating to us as we work with people, what changes in their life that has nothing to do with their health, their diet, and their exercise plan and all that, but the other things that it impacts. And business is a huge part of it.
Yeah, and I'd love to dive into that in a minute, but I'm curious, so what did you do to lose all that weight relatively quickly?
Well, it's so interesting. I get asked that a lot, and it really was. And it sounds so simple. It's truth. I made a decision. I made a decision that it was absolutely, it's going to be me, or that I was going to do it. There was never a question about what I was going to eat. I already knew that. And in fact, it's so funny. I have one of the things in the work that my wife and I do. We always tell our clients before we take them on that we are never going to tell you what to eat or what exercise to do, because we don't believe that's the core problem. I have a client who came to me about 2 years ago. He's an individual, and I'm answering your question a really long way. I apologize, but it's the best way to answer it, I think, is he had struggled with weight a long time, but he got hurt and gained about 200 pounds over about 5 years. And he'd never been on a diet ever. And this is an adult man in his late 40s. And so when he came into our program, he said, but what am I going to eat? And I said, well, if your wife and your two daughters who you love dearly, they were being held for ransom, and the only way you got them back alive was to lose 1 pound over the next week. And you can't do anything unsafe. It'd have to be something that your doctor would approve of, even though you've never been on diet, intuitively that you approve of. It has to be something that you would absolutely be able to do, and with 100% certain to lose that 1 pound over the next week. And he thought for a couple of minutes. It seemed like it was probably 30 seconds, but he went silent. He's a real humble guy. And he said, I guess I could eat less. And I said, that's where you start. And it sounds funny to say it, but it's really not funny. I don't mean it to be funny. It's that he already knew. And 100, and he's down 100, I think last I looked, about 140 pounds now from where he was. He was in a wheelchair. If he had to walk more than 10 feet, he rides bikes, does exercises daily. I didn't tell him to do any of that, but it was never the diet. It was always the decision. It was always the decision to make. And we work with people, and this isn't a commercial about me. I apologize, but I just use examples. But we work with people, we work with them on the stick to it, going the distance. And it's pretty interesting, the business implications this had for this individuals and much others do.
So when people are overweight and I guess or obese, let's just say 100 pounds plus overweight,
Mhm.
what do you find is usually the culprit? Is it always overeating or is it lack of extra? I mean, it's probably a combination of things, but like, could there be a genetic thing or is it pretty much usually always overeating?
Well, yeah, I mean, the answer is there's probably there are some conditions out there that an individual cannot lose weight. I'm sure of. I'm not a doctor or dietitian or physical fitness expert in any of those things, but I've not run into it yet. I've never run into it in the work that we're doing. And normally, and this sounds like a non-answer, but it really is the answer. You're right. I mean, it's a math equation at some level. But at the end of the day, it's the belief that it's possible and the willingness to go the distance. That's the challenge. It is every time. It's the belief that it's possible. And is it more important to have this thing that what was my drug of choice for so long? I didn't struggle with alcohol. I didn't have no problem with somebody who have a drink that can handle it. I didn't struggle with drugs. Those single serving sizes of Doritos that say family size on them, I don't know why. And those were always a challenge. And so at the end of the day, for so many people, it's when they realize what it's costing them, not just health wise, when you realize it, it's just fascinating to me when somebody gets a hold of, if you were diagnosed with a terrible disease like cancer, God forbid, most people will do anything they can to win at that disease because they know the outcome is death. They know the outcome is, well, in most cases, that it's death or it's some awful thing. But when it comes to something like overweight or obesity, it's the belief that there's always tomorrow. It's the greatest lie in the world. Yeah, I mean, it is. And have you been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes yet was the question. See, I hadn't been diagnosed with any of these illnesses. I had sleep apnea, which think about it. I was going to bed at night with a mask. Man was not meant to go to bed at night with a mask. And it was something I could fix, but it was like the frog in the pot of water. He will not jump out if it starts cool or just lukewarm, and he boils himself to death. He'll stay in there till that water gets to the boiling point and dies. But if you put a frog in a very hot on water, pop right out. So when I look at the individuals that I've talked to or look at them, what I'm saying, when I think about it, is just the belief that you can do it so often. When you believe you can do it and you're willing to go the distance. And again, I didn't come to give you all these examples, but you're bringing up quite great questions. Uh, One of the individuals that had participated in our program, as you 7 months in, 71 years old. Now, this guy was a rare individual. He was 353 pounds, 5'11" or 5'10". I don't recall, right around there, 353. So morbidly obese, heart condition, two fused vertebrae, walks with a walker, back problems, just awful with the fused vertebrae. And he came into it. He hadn't been below 300, I think, in 4 decades, something like that. He hit the 270s. He sent me a note the other day. He's in the 270s now. And it was never, he always had the capability to do it. Now that's 70 something pounds in about 7 months. That's not a crazy amount of weight in that period of time. But think about this guy. He can't even exercise. So is exercise important? Well, it's great if you can do it, but everybody can't do it. I mean, so at some level, you have to become an expert on you.
Mm.
And this is what I say all the time. The reason we don't give out diets is because I probably was on 6 or 7 dozen diets over 35 years, and every one of them was wrong. No, they weren't. I was unwilling to go to the distance. I couldn't have everything I wanted. I mean, I wanted what I wanted, and I was unwilling to change. And those diets, when an individual has to take ownership of it, then the diet's not the fault. They become an expert on them because some people do better with caloric restriction. Some people do better with controlling macros. Some people do better with intermittent fasting. Some people do better with a myriad of things. But at the end of the day, if all the responsibility is on the individual, and they have to become an expert on them. Kind of like with money. Like how long have you been in business owner, Sarah? I don't know how long.
Over a decade. I've tried this, that, and the other thing for over a decade, but just got into podcasting about 3 years ago.
So long time. So did you know everything about podcasting when you first got in?
No.
Did you know everything? No. And I mean, I don't mean to turn the tables asking questions, but it's interesting. But you learned it, you applied it because it was so important to you and you want to get a message out. You wanted to get your voice out of there. And that's the way it is for our clients when they come to us. It was the way it was for me. I had to become an expert on me. I had to figure out what worked for me. And at some level, it's pretty quantifiable. It's very simple. It's not easy. And so we teach the stuff that kept me from sticking to it for so long, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But it's not easy. I won't tell anybody it's easy, but it is simple.
You had mentioned that you didn't have issues with drinking and drugs, it was the food, and one thing that I feel like people who don't have an eating problem will say is, well, like, say there's some Oreos or chips or something sitting out, and they'll be like, "Well, just don't eat it." But to me, that's like telling an alcoholic, like, say there's some beer in the fridge and you live with an alcoholic and you're like, "Well, just don't drink it." I mean, that doesn't really work, you know? I feel like it's different because you don't have to drink, you don't have to do drugs, but you have to eat. But you have
No,
to so it's like you're making a decision at least 3 times or more a day.
no, I spot on. You reminded me of a client from a few years ago that he didn't have hundreds of lose. He had about 60 pounds to lose, but he held it for years and never had any luck at it often. And a couple weeks our program, he was doing really good. And he came to the call with me and he said, "Alan, you know what I had for breakfast this morning?" I said, "No, what'd you have for breakfast this morning?" He said, "Alan, I had apple pie." I said, "Awesome. I said, "You figured it out, didn't you?" He said, "I did. I figured out that I couldn't have it yesterday when I really wanted it, and I worked through what I know works for me, and then I figured that I could have it the next day, so I stuck it in the refrigerator. I dared anybody to eat it, and that was my thing." This guy was losing weight doing that. Now, he didn't have apple pie every day, okay? But he made a decision based on what he was figuring out about his own body, what was working for him that he could go the distance. And that's why I believe all food at some level. Now, there are obviously foods that are better for you, worse for you. And again, I'm not a dietitian or nutritionist, but I believe God declared all the food good. It just didn't say eat it all at once like I used to try to. That was my deal. so, it is challenging, but at the same time, when you think about, for example, from a business perspective, one of the triggers for me to get my weight off was that I shared my brain with that 100 plus pounds every day. And it was costing me at such a high level. And I realized that I was sharing my mind with that beast, so to speak. Now, there's no question. I mean, just don't need it is tough. I mean, I get it. I mean, hey, got my t-shirt. I know exactly what you mean. But at the end of the day, when the reason to do it is powerful enough, and I firmly believed I had less than 10 years to live, even though I was not diagnosed with anything bad at all. I mean, well, sleep apnea has a side effect of stopping breathing. That is bad. But I didn't have type 2 diabetes. I didn't have a heart condition. I didn't have those things. But and a lot of people say, "Well, gosh, Alan, you're fat shaming people." I said, "No, I'm not. I've never once told anybody what their ideal weight should be. I ask them what their ideal weight is." And people say, "Well, how do you define that?" I said, "The weight that you have freedom at." And so if somebody's weight is holding them back, they don't have freedom. I want people to be healthy and live a healthy, long life. Certainly. I mean, I'm not discounting that whatsoever. But if they're going out and not living because of their weight, if they're going into situations in business, wondering if they're missing a sale in a sales situation, like I used to be in the insurance business, and that happened to me all the time. I wondered if the thin guy got the deal because it spoke to discipline, even though it
Mm,
was a struggle for me. So it was costing. I mean, one of my clients he's pretty well known in the affiliate world. His name's Matt
mhm.
McWilliams.
Oh, yeah.
Matt was when I met Matt. We have an interesting story in that when I first started this, I had so many people coming to me about their weight because of what happened with us. And I just would tell people, I said, "You don't want to do what I'm going to tell you to do." I said, I'll know a handful of people, and then there became more people that we were helping. And they all wanted me to tell them what to eat. And I said, "Stupid. You already know what to eat." I mean, so, I mean, we all do at some level, and I'm not calling people foolish, but this is what I was saying to myself. But I had a mentor of mine, Dan Miller, who I used to work. He loved me. He's been a vendor for about 16 years. And he said, man, you ought to be a weight loss coach. And I said, I do not want to tell anybody what to eat or what exercises to do. He said, well, whatever. He said, but that's what I believe. And he knew me pretty well. I mean, this is a guy who walked me through a lot of different business ventures. And an individual heard my story. Actually heard my wife lost 63 pounds in 190 days when I was losing weight too. But this individual heard my story and he came to me, he said, Alan, my weight's holding me back. And so I said, I gave him three. It was when I was doing this individually. I said, I'll do 3 sessions with you. I don't really want to coach this whatsoever. I said, but I'll never tell you what to eat or what exercise to do. But he got free the first day. It was just funny. Now he weighed 370 plus pounds when he started with me. He lost over 100. I can't remember the exact amount, but he ran his first mile he ever ran in his life. He became a coach. He'd been wanting to do this for years, and now he's speaking and writing and in front of cameras all day long, not in the shame that he was in, doing. And he's in the healthiest been in years, and it happens that way. But shortly after that, I'd followed Matt McWilliams for about 4 years and on his podcast and had a lot of respect for him. And I knew he needed help. I just could tell that there was something about I did not know the guy, never met him. But I knew some people that knew him. And I said, I'm going to help this guy today. And it was in June of 2019. I got his number by late in the day and called him. And I said, you want help with your weight? And he said, God, would you? And I said, absolutely. I said, but I'm never doing what exercise to do. And so he became a client. And it was interesting. He'd been at a meal with Michael Hyatt, Amy Porterfield, and Jeff Walker. And he was the only that got the table. And he just felt like, and it hurt him. And so he ended up losing 93 pounds of fat and gaining 30 pounds of muscle. He got incredible shape and his business exploded too. I mean, it exploded in a great way. I mean, he was already successful, but he was telling me this the other day. He said, it would have never happened at my previous weight. It would have never happened there. Number one, you've got energy issues. Now, that's an obvious one, but we forget. But when Matt was carrying around 90 pounds extra fat, or I was carrying over 100 pounds more fat, you just can't do the work of an entrepreneur at the same level. The other piece of it too, is just so interesting, the mental clarity that you get as you get healthier, as you lose the weight. It changes, and it is those pieces matter. And for an entrepreneur, somebody who's the CEO of their own business, from a leadership side, and I thought of him as leader. He said, and he was a leader then. He said, but Alan, before you started working with me, I had 2 people on my team. I got 15 on my team now, and on and on. And again, I don't say any of this to impress anybody that's listening. I say it to impress upon them. It's never the diet. If the diet were the solution, you'd already be done. If you're listening, somebody who's listening, if they're listening and they struggle with weight, if the diet were the solution, it's a $72 billion industry in the United States alone. The diet industry, it's like you said earlier, it's a different animal. I mean, it's like somebody who is a alcoholic or drug addict, they get their beast up. People who struggle with weight like I did, we've got to take a reach for a walk 3 or 4 times a day and not get eaten by it. And so it's really, it's really the truth. But when somebody gets a hold of what's possible, and what I love to see happen is when the identity changes. And this is what I'm after. Just so, I give people a look under the hood. The identity shifts and they get a new standard. For example, you look like we're on video and you look like you live in a nice place. You don't live in a tent. Right?
Right.
If you were told you had to live in a tent, you find a way to get another nice place because that's your standard. But when I was struggling with obesity, my standard was the 290s. I was willing to accept 290s at 5'11", but 300 wasn't. It was a trigger point for me, a tipping point, you might say. But at the end of the day, when somebody takes on a new identity, that's when everything starts to change. It's when, like a client of mine who now they've got a term in his international companies, he's never been recognized once. He's still got a lot of weight to lose, got a lot of weight left to lose, but he's changed the people around him. And so he's become one of the top salespeople for a company that he is not even a salesperson for. He's more, it's not physical attractive. It's just that magnetism that you get when you get confidence that you haven't had, or like one of our ladies who, single mom, she's still got a lot of weight left to lose, but she's shifted her identity now. And just so happens she got the biggest job she ever got. And I've trained on career. She got the biggest job she ever gotten with a company that's a household word and it's like a dream job. There's no coincidences. These things happen. It's almost like the creator of the universe, regardless of somebody's worldview. My worldview is Christian. I just believe God made the universe, but that if it's the universe or whatever that somebody was look about, that's fine. It's as though the universe or God's saying, if you just get this one area cleaned up, I'll open the floodgates for you. And I've seen it happen over and over and over again. And it brings chills to me when I see it, like in a good kind of like goosebumps kind of stuff. So I didn't mean to get on a soapbox. But
Oh, no problem.
I'm
Yeah.
passionate about this thing.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with Matt McWilliams. He was on my podcast a while back ago, and all the people you listed, Amy Porterfield, Michael Hyatt, Jeff Walker, I've heard of all of them. So, as far as like weight impacting business, obviously you mentioned the energy factor, I guess probably the confidence factor. What other ways?
Absolutely. There's 5 key areas, and I touched on them a little bit. I mean, when you obviously energy is a big factor, and I talked about that just a few minutes ago, but also mental clarity. If you're constantly having to think about, well, number one, if you're most people, not all people, most people who struggle with their weight don't sleep that well. And it speaks to their mental clarity and what they're able to do. And when you're a business owner, you got to be on point, especially as an entrepreneur who's the CEO, the chief bottle washer, they everything in their business, and they're the marketer. They have to write content. They have to do all these things. Mental clarity is for that. And as the weight comes down, it's interesting how that mental clarity goes up. And
Mm.
what I call mind sharing your mind with that beast. If you have to share your mind with worry over weight, and again, I never tell anybody what they should weigh. But if somebody's bothered by what they weigh, if they can't walk into a room and feel 100% confident, regardless of what they're wearing, talking about G-rated stuff, not anything beyond that, but what they're wearing, if they're worried about sitting in a booth, I mean, these are things I worried about. I was worried about sitting in a booth and getting stuck in the booth. I was worried about going in someone's home. I did face-to-face sales. Worried about sitting in somebody's home and getting stuck between the two arms of the chair. I had to pick the correct chair because I was so wide. I was worried about if I had to fly to an appointment. I was worried about getting on the airplane and have to push that stinking button to get the stewardess to bring me a seatbelt extender. It's like the shame of the airline industry. Everybody's talking about masks, but they ought to be talking about seatbelt extenders. Those things will freak you out. I've had so many of my clients, that's what they had to think about that. Having to think about those things, it's like you've got this hindrance constantly that keeps you from being able to perform at your highest level. When you're not worrying about, or an individual's not worried about that stuff all the time, they're going to get momentum. They're going to get it. If they're married, I mean, oh my gosh, the stories of the people who told me, and I've talked to thousands of people literally who struggle, and I've gotten to hear things, relationship issues where spouses are frustrated about it, where they don't have the kind of intimacy that impacts your business. I mean, the relationships, but at the end of the day, it's when you know that you know that you know that you're doing everything you can. You're tackling whether an individual, like as soon as I knew that I was going to happen, that there was no turning back. I did the Cortez principle, which for those that are familiar with that, look up Cortez, but he burned all the ships. And so when I burned all the ships and I knew there was no way for me to turn back without a lot of anguish, it became easy. And well, excuse me, it became simpler. It became easier. It was never easy. But here's the thing that so many of us do, and this is why we get into trouble on these with it, is we dabble. And when we dabble at it, do you know anybody that multitasks very well? Nobody does it right. Because and the first person that told me that is actually Jerry Robbins, Tony Robbins' son. He said multitasking is the least efficient way to be. It takes your focus. Think about it. We all do it at some level, but it takes the focus away. And when you can focus, it's like it just works. When you get that chunk down, whatever that is, then it opens up other possibilities where you can spend energy. And you brought up confidence. And I mean, we could talk all night about that, but it's the truth, because at the end of the day, when this simple issue gets handled, it's a first world issue. Obviously, we live in a very blessed world that has a lot of food. It's a first world issue that when we handle it, it just opens up these other possibilities. And there's nothing that tastes nearly as good as when you're getting success in an area that you haven't gotten success in. You're like, what does that have to do with weight loss?
Mm.
It's kind of like when you get your finances under control. Things that don't relate to finances start to work out. It's just crazy. So I hope that makes sense. I didn't mean to ramble so much. Forgive me.
Oh, no, no problem. So, for someone who say they have so much weight to lose, let's say over 100 pounds, because that obviously would be overwhelming
Mhm.
and
Sure.
almost kind of like you can't even get started. Kind of like when I was paying off debt, the amount of debt, it was just so overwhelming. It's like, where do you start? Well, I figured out where to start because I did Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace. But
Mhm.
before we did that, it's kinda like, where do you start and, like, how long is this gonna take and how much sacrifice and blah, 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 blah. So when it comes to weight, how if for someone who has to lose that much, how do you get the motivation to start and to keep going? 'Cause it seems like it would be kind of a daily thing.
There's no doubt. But obviously, the cost of what I look at, and it's like when people come to me, it's a lot of people come to me to be a client, and about 4 out of 10 of the people that come to me to be a client, I'll take because I've got to believe that it's costing them more than enough to make them take action, if that makes sense. But the first thing I want to say about that, and it just, I had this thought. I mean, if someone's losing weight, for example, I was always on the 60, 70, 80 diets I've been on over 30 years. I was always really losing weight for this one reason. So I could eat what I want, when I wanted, fit when I wanted, as much as I wanted at some point. That would be exactly like you going through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace so that you could spend what you want as much as you want, whenever you wanted. That's not what you did it?
Right, exactly.
I mean, it would be, yeah, it's the same thing. So, I mean, obviously different scenario, but it's essentially the same principle. So, number one, they've got to get really clear on what it's costing them. And I don't mean just financially what somebody is costing somebody to be overweight, but to look at it really with in a honest lens. Like, and that's what happened to me. I looked at my situation for the first time at age 55 years old, and I was positive I wouldn't live beyond 10 years. I mean, I was positive because, see, the other thing is I wasn't stopping at 304. This thought of I'll never go beyond this. Oh, bull. I would have gone way beyond that. I mean, if I'd have gone there, I'd have gone to 310, and then 310 would have been 320, and 320 would have been 330, then, and so forth. At that point, thinking of my wife married to another man because I couldn't put down my fork was very costly to me. And for my kids to be standing at my grave, and while I wouldn't be here, I believe God loves you regardless of whether you're 100 pounds or 1,000 pounds. That's not the issue. That's not what we're talking about. But I would be somewhere else, hopefully in a lot better place. But they would be standing there saying, gosh, what if dad would have done what was necessary? He'd be here for us. What if he and my daughter would be walking down the aisle with another man as her giving her away at her wedding or those things? And that made being 304 pounds very expensive to me. It
Mm,
really did. So they have to really look at the cost. What is it? If somebody's happy where they're, God bless them. I mean, as long as you're healthy, I'm all for it. So I don't look at the numbers on the BMI chart, say you should weigh this. What I want to know is where you're free. Number one, where are you free? Really free, and then, but at the same time, we have this. A lot of in weight loss, people talk about, well, don't lose it too fast. Don't lose it too fast. Slow and steady wins the race. These kind of, you ever heard those kind of that
mm,
terminology around weight loss? Okay.
mhm,
Well, put it in perspective. Put it in perspective. Okay. It took me 35 years to gain basically 130 pounds. That's about 4 pounds a year. So if I only, now I lost it quicker and I didn't do anything unhealthy, but I knew what had to be done. I always knew what had to be done. There was never a question. But if I'd only lost a pound a week, I would have been losing that weight. I have to do the math at about 12 times faster than I gained it.
mhm,
And so we have this perspective. You have to get a perspective shift that is fast. That's blazing fast compared to how it was gained. We
mhm,
gained weight 5, 6 pounds a year, 4 pounds a year, 3 pounds a year, depending on the individual over a period of time. And they're like, God, I gained it so fast. But then when we start losing at a pound a week or 2 pounds a week or 3 pounds a week, it's taking forever. The taking forever part comes in to the I want to eat what I want when I want it as much as I want. And so if that's the goal, don't even start.
mm,
But if the
mhm,
goal is to really get free, if the goal is to really get free, and I'm not talking about where you can go to the whatever place and eat whatever you want again. What I'm saying is where you really know that you're doing your best. It's just like with your money. I mean, after doing Dave Ramsey's process, did everything you invest in earn 12% every year like clockwork? No, I mean, but that's the kind of thing we don't get perfection, but you get better, you make progress, though, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so you get out of debt, you invest money, you start making progress. So when people start looking at it from that perspective, they're able to make great strides. And we do a lot of work in our program around the mindset of it. And just like you have to change your identity at some level. It
mhm.
has to be done. If the identity, for example, it's always interesting. I can always spot it. Well, maybe not always, but I feel like I can always spot it. But when somebody gets to the point where, regardless of how much more they have to lose, like the gentleman I was talking about who was in a wheelchair that is down about 135 pounds now, or 100, whatever, 140, whatever it is now. About 10 pounds in, he was well over 400 pounds. He got to what I call the watch me stage. It's a stage that I got into in my journey really quick. And I said to him one day, I said, what would you tell somebody that didn't believe you're going to reach under 200 pounds again? He'd say, Alan, they can just watch me because I'm.
Mm.
Has he done it as quickly as he wants? No, but is he going 100%? There's no way he won't get there. So I don't know if I answered your question very well. I feel like I rambled again, but
And no, I feel like you did because you kind of put in perspective of it might take someone a decade or 2 decades or whatever to be the 100 pounds or whatever it is overweight. And so when someone feels overwhelmed at the 100 pounds or whatever that they need to lose, but then when you start thinking, okay, it took me 10, 20 years to get this far, but it's probably only going to take me 1 or 2 years to lose it, that definitely puts a different perspective on it. And then the other thing you mentioned about how if the goal is to get to your ideal weight and then start eating whatever you want again, what's the point? So it's like, even though it might be overwhelming to lose 100 pounds, whatever you're doing to lose the 100 pounds, you have to keep doing to maintain the weight. You can't just go back to eating everything, just like with Dave Ramsey, like once the debt's paid off, like you said, you don't just go racking up a bunch of new debt or spending frivolously. I love those 2 kind of comparisons and
yeah, it's
perspectives.
well, it is, and it's and I always I encourage our clients to figure out what's it worth to you. For example, and there's no shame in any of it. And so, for example, and I'm going to use Dave Ramsey. I'm real familiar with Dave Ramsey stuff. And Dave Ramsey says no credit, no nothing. But there are people who go through dating trends that use credit card and whatever. And there's no shame in that. But he has particular things he recommends people to do along the journey to get them to where they're going. But once they get there, once they get an emergency fund, once they get all those things handled, then he doesn't say don't ever go on a vacation. Are you kidding me? He doesn't say just spend the rest of your life pouring money into a 401k, in which you need to save and all that. What he says is have some fun. Have some fun. And so I encourage my clients, have some fun. I mean, when people say to me, I ate bad food, I'm like, no, no, no. That's no such thing as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I don't want them, I don't want them to have Skittles be their primary food choice. That's the first thing pop in my mind. But at the end of the day, when somebody, if they figured out, for example, if you're going on vacation and you spend $2,000, $10,000, whatever that vacation may be, if you're going on that vacation, he budgeted it beforehand, and you do the same thing with food. I mean, but the problem is we just don't want to go to that trouble because the cheesecake's so stinking good, and we don't want to have to face. It's like the first time you face your budget, you don't want to have to face that. Does that make sense? I mean, it's like,
Mhm.
but it's so much easier just to pull a Visa, the American Express, and the Mastercard out. And because I really want to go to Hawaii. I know I only make $10,000 a year and have a 100,000 debt, but I really want to go to Hawaii. And so you have to look at it with the same perspective that is, do I enjoy vegetables and lean protein? Yeah. Yeah, sure I do. Do I eat more of that now than I used to? Yeah. But I like Chick-fil-A sandwich once in a while too. But it's not the standard. It's not the standard anymore. It's not where I'm gonna live. Nothing wrong with Truck Kathy's food and God rest his soul. But at the end of the day, I'm just not gonna do that. It's not gonna be who I am anymore because there's too much at stake.
Mhm.
There's just too much at stake. And because I know the price. I know the price of letting that obesity carry away because I've seen it. The stories that I've heard would break your heart. Again, there's no shame because we are where we are. But at the end of the day, we don't have to stay there. And that's the
Mm,
really good news. We don't have to. There's always a way for the committed.
mm,
There's always a way. And it's fun to watch it when somebody gets free and they start realizing this is another piece too. I could have been standing there at 304 pounds amongst 100 men and women that looked like they stepped out of a James Bond movie. Now, all those people are zero body fat and they're perfect and everything, and they look great. But each one of those individuals, I'm positive, has a weight that they carry. It's just not physical weight. It's so interesting when my clients start losing weight, they start inspiring skinny people.
hmm.
They start inspiring them to overcome challenges they have in their life. And it's always fun to watch because there's just some of the benefits. So when people say to me, "Oh, I just hate this," like I had a client fall back that their scale was broken when they started, and they found out their scale underweighed them 30 pounds.
Hmm.
And that's a significant amount of weight. You know, my response to them was, I said, "Awesome. That's great." I said, "Because when you reach your ideal weight, the victory is going to be that much better. It's going to be so much more fun." I don't want to weigh 500 pounds or 600 pounds, but it would be a lot, the victory be that much sweeter than 300 pounds that from where I came from. So I don't want people to gain weight so they'll lose it. That's not at all what I'm saying, but I'm saying that that my weight was a gift. It was a gift that I did not need to keep, but it was a gift. And I've seen it repeat over and over.
So can you tell us a little bit about your program, like how, because I know you don't talk about dieting and exercise or prescribe a particular dieting or exercise. So I guess how does your program work or how do you help people?
Well, when it comes to, again, I'm not for everybody, and I don't say that to be coy. I'm very sincere, with that. The best thing I can tell people to do, in fact, I'll say this, Sarah, I actually prepared something for your audience, and if they'll go to my website is Transform My Future, just like it sounds, transform my future.com/frugal, FRUGAL, for your audience. This is just for your audience. I prepared a free training where I walk through the 5-step strategy that I use to lose 129 pounds in 260 days and what I teach my clients. And if you're looking for a diet, I would go to Google. There's 1,000 of them out there. So I'm kidding, but if they want to see that, that really does walk them through process. And it's right. I had a lady, I think this is where we got online. I had a lady that watched that training a year ago that it was just a few days ago. She sent me an email. She lost 30 pounds just from watching that training. There's nothing to buy. They don't have to buy a thing. But when people go through my program, we work on the pieces that were always left out, the unspoken things that were, whether it be the kind of programs that you go and eat certain types of food, or you get the programs where you go to a class each week, and I won't name names of different companies, and they're all good. I mean, all of them at some level are good, but it was always these unspoken things that I intuitively knew mattered. And that's what we work with our clients on. Do they have to change what they eat? Yep. There's no way around it. So, do they have to exercise? Well, it's certainly beneficial, but not everybody can. But at the end of the day, I will say it over and over. It is always the decision. It's never the diet. When an individual comes at it from the same level of decisiveness that, my wife, we have 4 kids, as I mentioned earlier, but they're still kids to us as the parents. And so if one of those kids needed something, I mean, we have a daughter with type 1 diabetes, which is a genetic disorder. It has nothing to do with weight. She's not ideal weight. But when she has a blood sugar low, her mother will drive 3 hours to the University of Florida if she has to make sure she's okay. I mean, that's what people do when things are important to them and to help them. And so when we get that way about our weight, everything becomes possible then. It
Mhm.
does. But we're big on teaching to stick to it. It was interesting when I started working and doing this work. The word I saw that I got told so much was stick to itiveness. I didn't even know it was a word. And so, but I think that at Scrabble, you can win at Scrabble if stick to this. And one of my early clients is a commercial airline pilot. And Can you imagine being an airline pilot? Airline pilots are all supposed to look like Leonardo DiCaprio did and Can't Catch Me. And so, but this guy was a, sharp guy, but he was obese, and he came in our program and changed everything and started helping other pilots. Other pilots got inspired because about 60% of pilots are overweight.
Oh, wow.
And so yeah, there's a lot of people out there that are struggling. If there's one thing I'd say to anybody that's listening, be encouraged. I mean, is it easy? No. And really, really look in the mirror and say, is my weight holding me back? And if it's not, great, great. There's no shame. There's absolutely no shame in anything I'm talking about. But if it is holding back, if they'll go watch that training, I think they'll find that it's not exactly what they've seen in other weight loss ideas. And I don't say that because I'm brilliant. I say that because I've sat between people's the elbows of somebody who was morbidly obese, and I was ashamed of it. And it cost me so much. And when I realized what it could cost me, everything changed.
Yeah, awesome. I'm gonna check that out probably after we get done here. So that transformmyfuture.com/frugal. I'll also have show notes at thesarahstjohn.com/Allen. And was there anything else that you wanted to say that we hadn't? I feel like we kind of touched on a whole bunch of stuff, but I didn't know if there was anything else in particular.
We do nothing in particular. It's your rodeo. I come to whatever you need from me. But again, just tell people to be encouraged. It is possible, because
Mm.
I was the worst of the worst foodie of the worst foodies. I mean, you name it, I struggle with it food wise. So it is possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Glad to be with you. It was fun.